Hello, Brav. We're back with Tried for Her Life by Mrs. E.D.E.N. Southworth. Continuing on chapter 13. In the midst of it, as I stopped early. Like a child home for the holidays, Sybil roamed about in delight from object to object, and fondly opened her disused piano to try it if it was still in tune. She was surprised and pleased to find that its tone was perfect. She had been absent but 2 months or less, and she knew it, yet she felt as if 2 years must have elapsed since she had touched her piano. She sat down and played some of her favorite airs, and sang some of her favorite songs to the great entertainment of Mr. Berners and Raphael. But this evening she was too happy and too restless to keep to any one thing, pawed on. So she soon left the piano and called Raphael to follow her to a bookstand in the corner, where she showed him some fine engravings from the old masters, a volume containing the masterpieces from Guido, Correggio, Leonardo, Murillo, and others. With all this wealth of art, the poor child artist was delighted. "But here is something better still, my boy. Here is a volume of the rarest gems," she said, opening a book of Raphael's Madonnas, and laying it before him. He uttered a cry of delight, and then checked himself, blushed, and apologized. Meanwhile, Lion Berners reclined upon the sofa. He was still weak from his accident, and from the imprudent journey that had followed it. He lay there, watching Sybil, content that she should be amused, until the wife herself suddenly lifted up the volume she had been examining with the boy, and calling Raphael to follow her, went over to her husband, and kneeling by his side, with the book resting on the edge of the sofa, she turned a page and said, "Look here, dear Lion, I want you to notice this amazing resemblance." And she pointed first to an engraved head of the artist Raphael, occupying the center of the title page, and then to the living head of the boy Raphael, bending by her side. "It is a likeness," said Lion. "Likeness? It is a portrait. If I had known this boy before, and had seen this picture anywhere else, I should have supposed it had been taken for him," said Sybil, earnestly. Lion closed the book, and asking her to play and sing a certain beautiful evening hymn, which was a great favorite with him, after which he suggested they should retire. So passed the first evening of Sybil's recovered home. The next morning, after she had breakfasted, she took another schoolgirl's holiday frolic. She ran all over the house, renewing her acquaintance with every room. She had scarcely finished her pleasant tour when old Joe came after her to say that Marser Sheridan from Blackville had called to see her. The announcement of this visitor awoke Sybil from her pleasant dream of home and safety. With trembling hands she arranged her dress and went below to the parlor, where she found Mr. Berners entertaining the lawyer. Pardon. Both arose at her entrance, and Mr. Sheridan shook hands with her, saying, "I do not know a better place to get up my brief for the defense, Mrs. Berners, than here on the scene of the tragedy and the imputed crime." The tone and manner of the lawyer were very cheerful, and at once restored Sybil's composure. "I have heard your explanation of the circumstances that led you to the bedside of Rosa Blondel at the moment in which her murderer had left her, but I heard it at second hand. I would now hear it from yourself," said Mr. Sheridan. Sybil began and related the whole story, which the lawyer took down from her lips. "Now," he said, "Mr. Berners, I would have your statement, commencing from the moment the deceased rushed from the library." Lion Berners related the circumstances attending Rosa Blondel's death, as far as he knew them, and now I would like to minutely examine the room in which the crime was committed," said Mr. Sheridan. "Come then," answered Lion Berners, and he led the lawyer to the room lately occupied by Rosa Blondel. A man might easily have escaped by these windows within an instant. A man might easily have escaped by these windows an instant after having committed the crime. They closed with a spring catch. The fact of their having been found fastened when the room was examined proved nothing whatever against my client. The murderer could, in an instant, unfasten one of them from within, jump through, and clap it to behind him. when it would be as fast as if secured by a careful servant within, said the lawyer after the examination was complete. Then they all returned to the library, where Mr. Sheridan summed up his brief for the defense. "Give yourself no uneasiness, Mrs. Berners," he said. "Your case lies in a nutshell. It is based upon your own explanation of your attitude at the bedside of the victim, and upon the fact, which I shall undertake to prove, that the assassin had escaped from the window at the foot of the bed." The lawyer spoke so cheerfully that Sybil's spirits rose again. He then, as a precautionary measure, to give them the help of the greatest bulwarks of the bar, advised that they should write to Washington to engage the services of the celebrated Ishmael Worth, who in a case like this would apply in the regular way to be admitted to plea. Mr. Berners accepted this advice and said that he would lose no time in following it. Then the lawyer took his leave. He had scarcely got out of sight before Captain Pendleton and his sister Beatrix drove up to the door. "I have come to stay with you as long as you will let me, my darling," said Beatrix. And Sybil hastened to welcome her. "Then you will stay with me forever, or until you are happily married, dearest," answered Sybil hospitably, as she led her friend up to a bedroom to lay off her bonnet. Captain Pendleton, meantime, was taken care of by Mr. Berners. "Clement," said the latter, when he had taken his guest to his dressing-room, "we are old tried friends and need not fear to speak the truth to each other. Tell me now frankly, has not the action of the judge in admitting Sybil to bail been very much censured? Will it not injure him and affect his position, even to the risk of impeachment?" "Oh, no. There is a great deal of talk, to be sure. Malcontents complain that he has exceeded his prerogative, that he has overstepped the law, that he has tried to establish a dangerous precedent, and so on, and so on." "And what does Judge Ruthven say to all this?" Nothing whatever. Do you suppose for an instant he is going to condescend to defend himself to such asses? He says nothing. But his friends, surely they defend him. They do. They tell the donkeys that a judge has certain discretionary powers to modify the severity of the law when justice requires it, that these modifications become precedents for other judges to follow, and finally they become laws that none may dispute. That, in this case, Judge Ruthven has followed the spirit of the law, if not its letter, that he based his act upon the fact that the accused lady, being perfectly safe from the officers of the law at the time, voluntarily came forward, delivered herself up, and challenged a trial, and that, therefore, she was a worthy object of the privilege of bail. Honest Clement Pendleton was no lawyer, and he had spoken a trifle unprofessionally, but it was no matter. Lion Berners understood him and was satisfied. Sybil and Beatrix came down to join them, and then they all adjourned to the dining room, where they had luncheon. Then Captain Pendleton went home, leaving Beatrix with Sybil. A few days after this, the court adjourned, and Sybil knew that she would not be brought to trial until the spring term. In that long interval, what discoveries might not be made to save her? Her hopes rose high. But, oh, she thought with a shudder, if these months had to be passed in prison. And in the depths of her grateful heart, she again thanked Providence and Judge Ruthven for her restoration to home and friends. Then Christmas came. Under the circumstances, they preferred to spend it very quietly. Beatrix was still with them, and Clement was invited to come and dine on Christmas Day. Sybil took great delight in delighting, and if good taste forbade her now to indulge in the lavish hospitality and gay festivity that had always been customary in Blackhall at this season, she determined to indemnify herself by making unusually handsome presents to her servants and dependents, as well as the most liberal donations to the poor, and so to be happy in the happiness she should bestow. With this intention, she put a small fortune in her longest purse, and went in her roomiest carriage to Blackville, intending to empty the purse and fill the carriage before her return. The day being Christmas Eve, the village was full of people, come there to shop for the holidays, and poor Sybil was brought to a sense of her condition by the treatment she received. Silence, rude stares, or injurious whispers greeted her as she passed, but they were only pin thrusts, which she soon forgot in the interesting errand upon which she had come. She loaded their carriage with bundles, boxes, and baskets, and returned home in time to separate the treasures and write upon each one of them the name of the person for whom it was intended. The next morning, Captain Pendleton arrived early to assist in the distribution of the presents. No one was neglected. Everybody was made happy with several valuable gifts. Little Crow went to paradise in the corner of the room with his cap full of toys. That day also Sybil's dependents enjoyed as good a dinner as was set for herself and her friends. So, after all, in spite of fate, they kept their Christmas merry still. When it was generally known that Sybil Berners had returned to Blackhall, there was much discussion among the ladies as to whether they should call on her. Some declared that she was a murderess, whose face they never could bear to look on, and therefore, of course, they never would go near her. Others, who said that they believed her guiltless and wished her well, added that they felt the same delicacy in going or in staying away. As in the first case, Mrs. Berners might consider their call an intrusion from motives of curiosity, and in the second case she might construe their absence into intentional neglect. And between these two extremes there was every shade of opinion as to Sybil's culpability, and every sort of reason for not going to see her just yet. And so it followed that Sybil passed a whole good, peaceful fortnight in the company of her husband, her 3 devoted friends, her faithful servants, and her little pets. But at length, early in January, sympathy on the one hand and curiosity on the other prevailed over every feeling and reason, and Sybil's neighbors, both detractors and defenders, began to call on her. But Mrs. Berners had penetration enough to know her friends from her foes, and so she felt no hesitation and made no mistakes when she welcomed the visits of the first and declined those of the last mentioned. So the winter slipped away peacefully enough, and Sybil seldom remembered what her friends tried to make her forget, the heavy cloud that still hung over her fate. She was reminded of it only when her counsel came to consult with her, but then they always wore cheerful countenances and spoke hopeful words that inspired her with confidence and courage. Sometimes, indeed, the recollection of the awful crisis that could not be shunned, that must be met, would come to her in the middle watches of the night, and fill her soul with horror. But with the first beams of the morning sun, this darkness of her spirit, like the darkness of the hour, would pass away. It was in all the reviving life and budding beauty of early spring that the criminal court resumed its sittings at Blackville. The case of Sybil Berners, charged with the murder of Rosa Blondell, was the very first upon the docket. It was a day as bright, beautiful, and glorious as any day that ever dawned, when the summons came that called Mrs. Berners up to the court to be put upon trial for her life. Her life, bruv. All right, goodbye. Good boy.